Hey guys, it's Denver, and welcome to the September edition of the monthly coaching, or the online coaching monthly Q&A. And thought I'd better get this to you guys sooner rather than later. I have not reviewed the questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and read them and answer them as best as I can. So, first question is, I go to the gym at 5:30 a.m. What should I eat beforehand that is quick and easy and isn't going to make me feel sick? All right, so I go to the gym at 5:30 a.m. I guess the question will be what time do you actually wake up? But let's just assume you wake up within 45 minutes before you go to the gym. The best thing to do is basically just have a liquid form of nutrition, whether that is a protein shake, whether that is a protein and carb shake, or even a Gatorade, which is just carbohydrate, or whether it's just a coffee. It's entirely up to you. If you train fasted first thing in the morning, resistance training, it would be recommended to have some form of protein. So even if it's branched chain amino acids like Extend, or it's a protein shake or half a protein shake, that would be an ideal approach. But for whatever reason, if you choose to train fasted, your post-workout meal becomes much more important. So you want to get that in as soon as you can. Whereas if you do eat before you train, your post-workout meal isn't as important because there's already nutrients floating around in your body doing what they do. So I would say if you're training at 5:30 in the morning, have some form of caffeine for energy, and have some form of protein, whether it's an amino acid product or it is protein. Me personally, I might just have a banana and a protein shake. Second question, you've mentioned intermittent fasting previously. What's a good structure to follow? How long, how many days, how much can you eat on a fast, non-fast day? So the basic structure of intermittent fasting is basically, it's structured in a way where you have a small, you have a fasting window and then you have a fed window. So you're either feeding or you're fasting. And the way that it's set up is basically you have between 4 to 8 hour feeding window and then 16 to whatever hour fasting window. And the reason why intermittent fasting is good is because if you limit yourself to only eating within 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours of your day, and you're on a low calorie diet, while you're fasting, you're not going to be thinking about food because you're not expecting it. And then while you're fed, the amount of time that you're eating is quite short. So if you have to fit in, let's just say it's a low calorie diet and you're eating 1,200 calories or 1,400 calories. If you have that much in a short period, you're going to feel full and satisfied during that time. So intermittent fasting is great if you are on a low calorie diet. If you're eating 3,500 calories a day and you're doing intermittent fasting, you're most likely going to feel bloated in that time or just full or just uncomfortable if you have to eat all that food volume in a short amount of time. So it's probably not ideal, which is why IF is more marketed towards people who are on a low calorie diet, or those looking to burn body fat or reduce, have weight management basically. And I don't always recommend IF, but if someone is in a position where they do have to eat less calories, I would suggest intermittent fasting, because you might find that if you only get hungry when you start to eat. If you wake up and have nothing all day because you're busy, you're doing your living, or you might just have some coffee or something, you don't really get hungry until you have your first meal, and that kind of triggers your body's desire for more food, especially with carbohydrates. So what's a good structure to follow? Basically, eat nothing throughout the day. If you're looking to build muscle, probably don't do IF because you will be eating a fair amount of food. But if you are looking to build muscle and want to do IF, I would say every 3 hours in your fasting state, you want to have some amino acids. So you're not completely fasted, but you're having branched chain aminos like Extend, for example. Have that every 3 hours, and then have an eating window from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. and have your pre-workout meal at around 2. You might train at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, and then have your post-workout meal at 6 or 7. And then you have 2 very important meals with training in the middle of them. Your pre-workout meal is going to have your carbs, your proteins, everything. Carbs and proteins, sorry. And then your post-workout meal might have more fats, etc. And the reason why you don't have fat pre-workout is just because it digests a little bit slower. So you might feel that while you're training. Yeah. So how many days should you do it? It's just a lifestyle. So it's kind of like flexible dieting or tracking your macros. It's just a lifestyle. You do it forever until you get sick of it, basically, or until it doesn't make sense anymore. And an example of that would be if you are on higher calories, you may want to eat during the day, or you may have social situations which might cause you to for it to be necessary to eat during the day. So it's really up to you how long it goes for. That was a long answer. All right, next question. Best ways to track hard to track foods. A hard to track food, in my opinion, would be nachos, right? If you just go to a Mexican restaurant and get nachos, it's got corn chips, it's got potentially has mince or salsa or sour cream, etc., etc. Best way to track that would be to guesstimate the quantity of each ingredient and just be like Doritos, nacho cheese Doritos, probably 30-40 grams. This much cheese, maybe about 50 grams of avocado, this much sour cream, whatever, and then just chuck it into MyFitnessPal as individual food sources. And that's probably the easiest way to track hard to track foods. And it's just a bit of guesstimating. Really, trying to track hard to track foods is still a good thing to do just because you have an idea of, looking at the bigger picture at your total day, you have accounted for things as best you can. And that's probably a better approach than not accounting for everything and then not really knowing where you are. And I'll also say that if you do have a food that's hard to track, on that day, probably don't try to hit your carb limits or your macronutrient limits if you don't feel the need to, because sometimes we guesstimate incorrectly. So if you do have nachos and then you've realized you've got more fats and more carbs in your diet, but you're not actually hungry, maybe just hold back on them, because it is possible that you did eat more than you thought you did in that meal. And there's really no benefit in having more unless your goal is to definitely just build muscle, not so much keeping body fat down. Good recommendations for maintaining consistency whilst eating out or snacking. Good recommendations for maintaining consistency. Well, the best recommendation to be consistent is to know the nutrient content of all the foods you consume and weigh and measure them yourself. When eating out, the best recommendation is to guesstimate your intake. A better recommendation would be try to eat the same foods. If you go out to eat, try to make it the same meal as often as you can. So if you love to go to Grilled and you get the Big Queenslander burger, try to always get that, so you're improving your consistency, even though there might be a bit of inconsistency per meal. You're going to be as consistent as possible. So I would say just try to have a smaller range of food sources or choices, because then you're doing a little bit less guessing in the grand scheme of things. Okay, some guidelines for sodium intake, the effects of too much, not enough, and inconsistency. So, sodium intake, there's no right or wrong amount. I would say that 2 grams per day or 2,000 milligrams per day is a reasonable intake that is quite normal. I do not know the recommended daily intake based on, the food pyramid or whatever government body, what they recommend. Some of you guys might know that. But really, your body will adjust and adapt to whatever amount of sodium you have. So if you have very little sodium, so the effects of sodium, if you have very little, and then tomorrow you go to McDonald's and you have all the sodium, 5,000 or 6,000, you will retain fluid that day and the following day while your body tries to deal with that. So the effects of sodium inconsistency is basically going to be a fluctuation in body weight and how you appear. If your body is accustomed to 5,000 milligrams of salt per day or 5 grams of salt per day or sodium, and you went to McDonald's, you probably wouldn't retain any fluid because your body is very accustomed to a higher amount of salt, and you'll be able to manage and deal with it better. So basically, with fluid intake or hydration or water intake and salt intake, your body's always adapting to get normality or to just find homeostasis, meaning that it just wants to be balanced. So if you have a high amount of water tomorrow, you're probably going to drink less the next day, or you're going to pee it out, etc. If you have a high amount of salt tomorrow, you're probably going to retain fluid, and then your body will try to get rid of it. If you try to keep your fluid intake the same always, there'll be no fluctuations in weight. If you try to keep your salt intake relatively the same as often as you can, there'll be very little fluctuation in weight as well. And in that situation, salt has no effect on how you look, basically. Not having enough salt could result in cramping up, reduced vascularity, so just less. If you're quite lean, you wouldn't see as many veins, things like that. Salt's actually very good for strength, believe it or not, because it will help you to retain fluid in a positive way, which can actually hydrate your cells better and make you feel stronger, or hydrate your cells, I guess I would say, your muscles, and everything will just feel stronger. And that is not science, but that is what I have believed to be true for many, many years. So if you want to question that, I'm happy to find some resources. But anyway, next question. Conversion of fat, protein, carbs to calories. I asked Google, and it was fat 9 calories, carbs 4 calories, protein 4 calories. Is this correct? Because putting it into my fitness tracker and used my daily macro allowance, putting it into MyFitnessPal, I've already used my daily macro allowance and I've got calories spare. Okay, so yes, the calories are correct. So there's 4 calories in 1 gram of protein. There's 4 calories in 1 gram of carbs. There's 9 calories in 1 gram of fat. The issue that you're facing with the inconsistency is basically it's a problem with the food data in MyFitnessPal. So if your protein shake has X amount of protein, carbs, and fats, and it equates to 100 calories, we know this because it's on the nutritional panel. But if you scan it on MyFitnessPal and it's got the macros correct, but the calorie amount is off, that's why it's causing a confliction, or that's why it's not working out for you. So you want to review all your food sources and make sure that the calorie amounts and the macro amounts are correct. This could take some time. It's a bit of a learning curve, but once you do it, for a week or two, you typically going to eat similar foods each day or each week, so that they're going to stay in your recent foods list anyway, so you'll have no problems with that. So just review everything. You'll find that there's 1 or 2 foods that you've tracked that is incorrect. Sometimes, like I've had a juice one time, and it was obviously predominantly carbohydrate because it was a fruit juice, and the carbs came up as fiber rather than carbs. So straight away it said I had 50 grams of fiber, in 1 glass of orange juice or whatever it was, which I knew was incorrect, and I saw it, so I removed that from my database, and I found one that was correct. If you can't find one that's correct, you can actually create your own foods in MyFitnessPal. So you just go to add new foods, put in the information, put in the calories, macronutrients, and it'll come up under My Foods. And then you've got a list of recent foods, and you know it's all correct. People who are very, very OCD about tracking macros and being consistent with nutrition, most of the foods they eat or they track on MyFitnessPal are foods that are put into the database themselves, rather than just using the wide range of options. All right, the last question before my battery goes flat is how to track foods when out socially, and also will having a non-macro track day affect progress? That is, still hit your calorie target, but eat foods that perhaps don't hit macro targets. For example, eating less during the day and going out for pizza, which won't hit your protein goals for the day, etc. So I'm going to answer that first. Basically, if your goal is to build muscle, improve your body composition, which means more muscle, less body fat, you do want to be tracking your protein intake on a daily basis, because protein is important. However, in most situations, I myself and most other coaches prescribe a protein intake that is above the RDI, which is the recommended daily intake. Now, the RDI is quite low because the RDI is for normal everyday people. You guys all lift weights. You're looking to increase hypertrophy or muscle size, so you do require more protein than the RDI. So technically, if you don't hit your protein goal, you're still having enough protein, But it would be very wise to focus on hitting that protein goal and then reaching your calorie goal as well. So allowing your carbs and your fats to fluctuate. If you're in a position where you want to build muscle more than anything, but you want to have a social life, definitely track protein and be okay with the fact of going over calories, because that way you're definitely building muscle. You might be adding some body fat in the process, but you're definitely building muscle. If you're someone whose main focus is to drop body fat more than building muscle, and you want to be social and things, you go out, when you track things, when you do track your total calories, because your total calories will be the main determinant of whether you lose weight or gain weight. But as a secondary focus, think about your protein as well. If you've hit your protein limit, if you've hit your calorie limit, but you're not quite at your protein, just leave it as it is and focus on the next day and try to get better protein. Hopefully that makes sense. So basically, bulking, protein is very important. You can go over your calorie amount to hit your protein goal, assuming you've gone over your carbs and fats because you're just enjoying life and being social, which isn't going to happen every day. Same scenario, but you're trying to lose fat. Get your protein as high as you can without going over your calorie intake for the day, and that way you're still trying to get the best you can out of your protein or your macros, but you're not over consuming calories. Therefore, you should be leaner the next day. And that is all the questions I have for this month. It was a short one, or a shorter one. If you have any other questions, let me know. If you have any questions about my answers, you guys can comment about that as well. And that is it. I'll see you guys next month.